Saudis extending a 1 million barrel cut, maybe even deepening. Russia, 300,000 barrels. What does that mean for the global oil market? And is this upside action we're seeing, is that a direct result?
I mean, I think that the Saudis have been very, very clear that they are going to do whatever it takes. They're back in Draghi mode to essentially get this oil recovery to remain on track through the end of the year. What I think is so interesting, Frank, is with the Chinese economic data out this morning, you would think that oil would be potentially softer. But again, I think it just speaks to the strength of the Saudi action in terms of the supply cuts.
All right. So when it comes to prices, we're seeing, a bit of a boost this morning. Long term, is this what could possibly push us up to maybe that $90 a barrel range?
I mean, certainly if the macro fears recede, I mean, you always have to look at this China story. I mean, that has been one of the headwinds for oil. There's been this big expectation of China back like gangbusters with the end of zero COVID. The import numbers have been solid. We had record numbers in June. Some analysts are saying, well, it's going into storage, but a barrel off the market's a barrel off the market. And so I think the Saudis have been really resolute. I mean, the fact that they said they could go deeper is an indication that they're very, very, convinced that they have this in hand if they just continue with the cuts.
Just to be clear, when you say import numbers for China, you're talking about oil imports. But I think a lot of people are looking at weak economic data and softening exports to the U.S. as also related to demand concerns.
Well, I think the issue is that the question is, yes, we had record numbers in June, but softer in July for crude imports. They look pretty good, though, over the first week of August. But the question is, are that basically the China's on a buying spree? Because you've got cheaper Russian barrels. Are those going into storage? So is there some underlying weakness which means that these import numbers won't hold? Again, though, the data on Chinese imports has been solid.
Okay, so you're not that concerned about China. And admittedly,
I think
other
we're
people
in watch and wait mode on China.
Right. But other people are pretty concerned.
Absolutely. And I think the interest rate story has been something, again, holding people back. They're basically saying, look, we still have these existing macro concerns. And I think that's what OPEC is reacting to. They're basically saying, not out of the woods, so we're going to keep these cuts going, particularly the unilateral Saudi cuts.
All right, so China's not the only area of concern, not for you, but for other people. But also, another area we have to look at, the situation in Ukraine following the collapse of the Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think this is the biggest story. I'm even jumping in right there, Frank.
Jump in, please.
I think end of year, the story we really need to be watching is what is happening in the Black Sea. This is a broader commodity story. The Russians pulled out of the Black Sea grain deal. Essentially now there's a de facto embargo on Ukrainian grain exports. What has Ukraine done in response? They started attacking Russian oil tankers in the Black Sea, trying to drive up tanker rates. Not getting enough attention, I think, that it should. I think this is an evolving story in terms of geopolitical risk in commodity markets. What's happening in terms of the Black Sea?
So risk often leads to price moves to the upside when people have concerns. So is this another factor that could push oil higher?
I mean, I think this is something the White House will be concerned about because, again, remember the price cap policy? That was designed to keep Russian barrels on the market at a discount. If we start to see significant rise in attacks on Black Sea tankers, again, that will send insurance rates higher. What is that going to do for oil prices? So this is an area of growing concern, I think, what's happening in the Black Sea. But it's also a food story as well. Yeah,
absolutely a food story. So you mentioned it's a broader commodity story. What's your outlook when it comes to wheat prices? Obviously, the Ukraine region, a big exporter of wheat.
I mean, what's interesting is we haven't had wheat prices soaring in part because there's been an abundant Russian wheat harvest. So the Russians are essentially taking out a competitor by blocking Ukraine's exports. But again, this will be something of grave concern as we get into the, this is a lasting story about basically taking Ukraine's exports off the market. That will be a concern for big importers. Who's a big importer of Ukrainian grain? China. So it'll be very interesting to see what China does in response to this Russian policy.